Good morning and welcome to Saturday special of Dr. Lamba's Awakening Call. Secularism might be enshrined in the amended Constitution of India. It was not the revolution, but it's not new to India. And nor is bigotry new to India. India has been a nation that has witnessed the rulers who were extremely secular and the rulers who were extremely bigoted and insular. But the fact that the Muslims could build their first church in Gujarat, followed by in Kerala in 623 and 629, that the Jews way back, centuries back, could come and find home in India, that Zoroastrians persecuted in Iran found their refuge in India, the whole country lives only in India now, shows that Indians were absolutely secular. But then, as I said, they have been extremely bigoted as well. However, when there's one person who is secular among the whole crowd of fanatics, then it does stand out. And Dara Shikoh, eldest son of Shahjahan, the heir apparent, eldest brother of Aurangzeb, according to some historians, is called the father of modern secularism. How far it's correct? He was designated with the title Padshah Buzurg Murtaba, Prince of the High Rank. He was favored as a successor by Shah Jahan, but he was defeated by his younger brother, Prince Muhyiddin, who became Emperor Aurangzeb and killed in 1659. And he is called the father of secularism, modern secularism, as if modern secularism is different than the secularism of old times. Anyway, Dara was undoubtedly a liberal minded, unorthodox Muslim, opposed to extremely orthodox Aurangzeb. And he even wrote a book, The Confluence of Two Seas, which argues for the harmony of Sufi philosophy and the Vedanta philosophy. Now, this made him a pariah, an outcast for the fanatic Muslims. And that's why he was defeated. Quite possible. The history of Indian subcontinent would have been different if Dara Shikoh had prevailed over Aurangzeb. But that's a matter of conjecture. It's customary to call Aurangzeb a fanatic and term his brother a secular. But if you look at the things, both of them had their faults. Aurangzeb gave money to many temples. He gave even gold to many temples. He did destroy many temples, but he also gave grants, land, and money. There is no denying the fact that personally he was a man of impeccable integrity, though his commitment to fanatic Islam was there. But Dara was more eclectic, while Aurangzeb was devoted to Quran. Dara was a scholar and well versed in Sanskrit and Hindi scriptures. Now, let me tell you very clearly that there is a mistaken notion that he knew Sanskrit. He did not know Sanskrit. But he hired Sanskrit scholars, and both of them, Aurangzeb and Dara, donated to temples like in Varanasi. So, every time Dara Shikoh is mentioned, Aurangzeb automatically drops up. It's a binary between the liberal Dara and the partly bigoted Aurangzeb. And let's not be clear. One politician doesn't like the other. He compares him to Aurangzeb. This is what's happening in India. But if you go back to the sources, contemporary sources which were available at that time, we find that the things were different. The story of Dara in the socio-economic context reveals that Dara was a follower of the Armenian Sufi mystic Saramal Kashani, and he was a follower of Lahore's famous Qadri Sufi Mia Mir. Now, Mia Mir is a Muslim leader, a religious leader, and this was the person who was invited by a Sikh Guru Arjan Dev to lay the foundation stone of Golden Temple in Amritsar. An example of extreme secularism that a Sikh leader, the Guru, invites a Muslim to lay the foundation stone. And Dara came after that. The person who invited Arjun Dev was executed by the grandfather of Dara Shikoh. Curiously, another thing which would be of interest of typically to Sikhs, Dara Shikoh was extremely friendly with the seventh Guru of Sikhs, Guru Har Rai. Guru Har Rai was the grandson of Arjan Dev. So the grandfathers at a level of enmity, one king, the other an ascetic, and the seer was practically burned to death. And the grandsons developed a curious friendship. And this friendship with Guru Har Rai was basically the reason of Dara Shikoh turning to Hinduism, trying to understand. So what he did, he translated 50 Upanishads. 50 Upanishads were translated into Persian by him. Now, as I said, he didn't know Sanskrit. So he would ask the Pandits to explain it to him, and then what he understood from the Pandits, he translated it into Persian. And the purpose was that the Muslim scholars could read Upanishad, and he called the translations Sire Akbar, the greatest mystery. Now, here is where I would say he was secular in modern sense. He called Quran Kitab-e Makman, the hidden book. And according to him, the base of that book is in Upanishad. And then he wrote Maima ul Bahrain, the confluence of two seas I referred to earlier. Now, one way of reading Dara is to look upon him in a nostalgic manner as a pre-modern liberal. But this is a sword which is misleading. Let's not forget, Dara never became an emperor. Had he become an emperor, would he have retained this sort of a thing? And basically, he was not meant to be an emperor. He's devoted his life studying, researching, and he was more interested in the spiritual advancement. And he was refashioning his spiritual thoughts with deep interest in the Indic thought, which was good as a scholar, but bad as a leader and bad as a king. The biggest problem was he was facing was the fount of pure monotheism. Now, if he wanted to be a real bridge builder, he wouldn't have bothered about building a bridge between monotheistic religion and polytheistic religion. That's Hindus. He would have himself lived a life, but he would not have tried to coerce the people, which he would have done had he become a king. And that would have been a disaster. Not that Aurangzeb was not a disaster, but it would have been as good a disaster as anybody else can imagine it to be. Now, Dara was also trying to model himself on his great grandfather Akbar. You remember Akbar had started his own religion, Deen-e-Ilahi, in which he took some aspects of Islam and some aspects of Hinduism, combined them and called it Deen-e-Ilahi. But he forgot that the amalgam of two religions was already there, at least in Punjab, called Sikhism, which took up the monotheism of Islam, no caste system of Islam, but the culture roots and the spiritual aspects were purely of Hinduism. So he was duplicating. And since he was not connected with the roots, he could not build a mass base the way Sikhism was expanding. So, coming back to Dara, nobody can deny that he was more liberal. But as I said earlier, I would not call him the father of modern secularism because India's finest secular king, little talked about, is Harshvardhan. You call Ashoka the Great, but he was basically first a king who became king by killing more than 100 of his cousins and brothers. And then War of Kalinga, and then he became a devout Buddhist. So when you are a devout to one religion, you cannot be secular. You may not persecute other religions, but by favoring one religion, you lose the right to be called secular. But Harshvardhan was the first king who was secular in the real sense of the term. And at one time, he directed his ministers that under no circumstance should there be any favoritism to any group. Now, again, don't forget the social political system at that time. Dara did not live in a democratic setup. So when Irfan, the historian, the famous historian, calls him the father of modern secularism, he's erring on the right side of the things. Our problem is that the ancient and medieval Indian history today is read as a simplistic reading of the past. Even critics of the Hindutva have claimed that the historians have not accounted for many things. The dichotomy on the one side, Aurangzeb is destroying the temples. On the other side, he is building the temple, or rather, not building, but giving money to the temples. But then, if the real history is to be seen, then we'll see that he also destroyed the masjids. Wherever he was basically utilitarian. Where he found that the temple or a masjid was standing in his way, he didn't hesitate to destroy it. Of course, he was more harsh with the destruction of temples. So the segment that claim the secular historians are somewhat to be blamed, especially about the negative aspects of Mughal. There has been a trend towards eulogizing Mughals till recently, and since Modi came into power, there is a trend towards denigrating them. So we have not taken a dispassionate objective view. And the result is that there is elevation and idealization of this period in one time and absolute demonization of that. And that is something which is not acceptable. So when Irfan Habib for instance, engages in deep critique of Mughal state and forgets about the exploitation of peasantry. Except one king, Akbar. Akbar's concept of land ownership, revenue collection was the first time that somebody attended to the need of the peasant. So one has to confront all these different limitations. And that's why I found the narrative quite suitable. In a narrative history or in a biography, one isn't making a single argument. And you have got to take things from a different angle. Now, imagine Jahangir on the one side is ordering the destruction of Arjun, Guru Arjun, and then he goes on hunting trade with Hindu rulers. And then he became very close. Very few people know it. And when I was reading Toske Jahangiri, I saw that he was the closest to a Hindu ascetic Chandru. Imagine a devout Muslim, an alcoholic at that, so not a Muslim any longer, but extremely close to Chandru, a Hindu ascetic, who instead, at the same time, was a great admirer of Guru Arjan Dev. So there was a deep engagement of the Mughals and their patronage of Indic intellectuals, religious figures at all levels. And that is what was required. Mr. Singh Jaspal has said, your today's talk should serve as an eye opener to many, I suppose. Thank you, Mr. Singh. I really appreciate your comment. And my purpose of the Saturday special is to open eyes to the closed chapters of history so that we can have a better life. Now, coming back, what happened in the colonial period? There was a fixation on the individual Mughal. We did not think of them as a flow of a river. We took the segments. So there was elevation of the persona of the rule during the age of so-called great Mughals. And the historians rightly moved away to study broader social aspects. And let's not forget, Mughal state was not just made of the ruler and the nobles, but look at its the totality as far as impact on the whole range of the people is concerned. And that would be correct. You Aurangzeb can be called a bigot, which undoubtedly he was. But then look at from his point of view, he wanted to establish the Islamic rule all over the world, basically. And that's why his eyes were not only in India, but they envisioned was extending up to Mesopotamia. Possibly Ghazwa Hind, the concept of converting India into Islamic land, was born from his concept. Now, coming back again, there is a necessity to have one corrective step to be taken. The colonial obsession was to paint Indian rulers as despots. India had become the land of people who could not govern themselves. That's what the British rule said, and that was absolutely wrong. If we marry narrative with a historiography, we'll find that the public conversation which is happening is a healthy trend. And that reveals that Dara Shikoh, not a Sanskrit scholar, was interested in Sanskrit and Sanskrit text. So he relied on the Brahmin intellectuals. And one thing, now the government is thinking of setting up a center for Sanskrit at the university. Another to cultivate an atmosphere where students can study, flourish intellectually. Look, this is happening in India. In Pakistan, just yesterday, they passed a law. They passed a law that study of Arabic is compulsory for every student. So If we combine the two, we find that narrow mindedness has always been there and we want to hark back to the past for different reasons. So, Indian history, if we see, is an embattled state today. India as a society is one place where history is a battleground. Let's not forget, this is the possibly the only place in the world where history itself is a battleground. And the battle isn't necessarily among professional historians. It's between ideologies that have taken place and are taking place today in the social media. But there's a welcome change, definitely. And that is that when there is an outstanding example, one candle in darkness, like Dara Shikoh, that gives hope of living together, as Mr. Jaspal Singh pointed out just now. This hope sustains life, sustains the concept of humanity, and sustains our belief in the basic goodness. Dara Shikoh, a lone secular but a scholar, maybe if he had been become a king, he might have been a model of Plato's philosopher king. But still, his greatest achievement was translation of 50 Upanishads into Persian, which then later on became the base of translation by Max Muller. And then, second was his book, The Sea of Confluence, the synthesis of Quran and Upanishad. For that alone, he stands in niche in the history not of India but of the world, of bridging the gap between two opposing forces. Thank you.